And welcome back, everybody, to part 2 with Mr. Paul Goranson of enCore Energy, where we talk about Gen 3 and moving forward with the nuclear industry. Okay, now this is part 2. That was simple. So
yeah,
I really like how you put it, that generation 1 was the people like Dennis Stover that created this, and I've heard them refer to themselves as people would call them baby miners, where they would take small projects that weren't economical for convention and be able to produce,
right.
and their own words. Your generation 2, which took it and put it onto a big scale, and you've worked for some very large companies, correct?
Yes, that's right. I'd say the largest I worked for was BHP Billiton, but that was not in production. That was really they acquired us through various acquisitions, and it was a very small. I was a very small fish in a very large pond of 65,000 employees around the world. But I say probably the big company I've worked for where I gained the most appreciation and also helped me, was kind of like a big piece of my career was working for Cameco. And that is I'll say that Cameco is strictly a uranium producer, uranium miner, which fit my niche. And also they have a strong management culture. And so it was a good experience to work for them, but it was a big company. So it took decisions didn't happen overnight. They couldn't, because of the size of the organization, the size of their board, it took a bit of time to get through decisions when they make commitments. It's not a fault, it's a feature of that process.
My favorite movie scene, Kathy Bates. Do you know I can't remember the name of the movie, Fried Green Tomatoes or something like that. When she goes to get I don't know if you know it, but she goes to get in a parking spot and she's like an unhappy middle-aged housewife and at a crossroads in her life, and she's driving this beater station wagon, and she tries to go into a parking spot at a grocery store, and this little red Corvette pulls in, and it's got 2 very young, attractive blondes, convertible, and she's frustrated, and she says, that was my parking spot. And she's very polite, and they had attitude, and they looked at her and they said, "Face it, lady, we're younger and faster." And she put the car in drive and jammed it into the little red Corvette. And they came screaming back and said, "What's your problem?" And she said, "I'm older and I have more insurance." I appreciate that more as I age. So you're Gen 2. So we need generation 3 in the industry, because now the industry is coming back. You're advancing projects towards production. There's a need for more uranium, for nuclear. Like, how do we get generation 3?
Well, that's a good question. That's what I've been focusing on, right? In my role here is that in addition to getting, the company into production and everything else, it has to be a sustainable business. And to be sustainable, it can't be a bunch of guys who are just a few years from, official, retirement age when we start getting our Social Security checks. So it's got to be someone, you got to have another generation. That's what we've been working on. So for me, I started building that network, that 3rd generation network, literally 15 years ago at Mustang. And so a lot of these guys came right out of school, started working for my company, for us, trained in how to do in-situ recovery, whether they're geologists or engineers, and provided as much latitude as they needed to learn and to take chances and take risks. And of course, what happens with that, all the great dreams can be always confounded by other priorities. And Fukushima happened, and the uranium industry collapsed. And so as a result, those folks went and found jobs elsewhere. But don't think I had cleaned out my Rolodex, pardon my reference to age. But I can tell you, Facebook Messenger has been a wonderful tool at finding people. And I've been able to recruit most of the people who work for me as young engineers and geologists to come back and work for us and be that's our generation 3. Now it's a limited group, but they're able to bring in other people.
Yeah.
And that's how I see we're going to build our long-term succession, is by getting some of these hard chargers and fire eaters that I had working for me back in the mid 2000s to come in and be the guys who are leading the organization.
Yeah.
And coming back in and having been there, done that, and seeing an opportunity and a future, they're going to come in and they're going to help be able to attract additional talent. And so far, it's paid off pretty well. We've been able to, in some cases where we actually been trying to attract the talent, having people in their late 30s and early 40s being the site leaders has really helped attract young people to want to come work for us.
Nice.
And so we haven't been doing a massive amount of hiring yet, but it's little by little as we have the need. But I'm pretty happy with the skill set of the people we've gotten, and fortunately, by identifying people who I know as being high potential employees at the time, that gives them the ability to have high expectations for the people they hire to come in. So
Yeah.
I feel pretty good about that, and I feel that I've been very fortunate to, the one thing I learned long ago is never burn your bridges. You never know who's going to work, you're going to work for, work with, or who's going to work for you in the future. And so
it's a huge part of what you're doing. It really
yeah.
is. You're the way I look at it, enCore and your team, along with other US companies, are at the forefront of building the nuclear industry again. It went into really a hiatus since 79 and I guess 3 Mile Island. Started producing less and less, but now people are starting to figure out that we need it, and starting to figure out you need domestic uranium in order to do it. A fair statement?
Yeah, that's because people have a tendency to believe their own press, and they get talked into the status quo when they believe the status quo will never change. A good example, you talk about nuclear energy, right? In the last run up of the uranium market, you know what, it was a nuclear renaissance, and not long after that, when Fukushima Daiichi happened, what was the talk about? Nuclear industry is dead. It's going to go away, never to come back. And get to here now, all of a sudden, guess what? We're talking about life extensions, power up rates on existing reactors. We're talking about new reactors. I mean, heck, the big news last week is that Vogtle 3 started generating electricity into the grid. That's the newest power plant in the United States. Vogtle 4 is not far behind. It took a while to get there because of a lot of, we lost that where the U.S. is lagging right now on the reactor side. It's generally in all manufacturing, whether it's for something like we use for submersible pumps all the way to nuclear power, the reactor vessels, the containment vessels. That technology, the skill set is gone. It's been offshored, and so hopefully that we'll be able to re-onshore that. But for the moment, we lost that when everybody thought, well, this is going to go away. We'll never need to keep that skill set. So they're perfectly willing to send it off that skill set off to China or to Russia or wherever, South America, wherever it goes, rather than keep it here. And so we're kind of learning some lessons, but the main thing is that nothing stays static. As much as people want it to stay static and keep the status quo, there's a such thing as called the second law of thermodynamics, which, to put it in a nutshell, is that nature always abhors the status quo and is always trying to find randomness to throw into to mix up the status quo. We see that in markets, right? We see that in markets, we see that in industries and everything else. So I could tell you that 5 years ago, the belief was that the uranium price is going to be $20 a pound and stay there forever. In fact, there was a trade report that said that, a couple of them said it's going to be $20 a pound. When they say that, back in 2005, they said the uranium, or 2004, it was three, that the uranium price is going to stay $9 a pound forever.
Wow.
And that's the time I started buying uranium stocks, because that usually once someone establishes what the status quo is going to be, it's going to change fairly quickly after that. And sure enough, it did. I could, 4 years ago, I was giving a presentation on the security of supply of uranium, and raising the specter that there could be a coup, political instability in Kazakhstan, or Russia could invade Ukraine and create massive amounts of disruption in the uranium supply, nuclear fuel supply chain. And I had a nuclear utility speak after me and start out the conversation by classing me as a gaslighter.
Wow.
Little did I know that I was going to have those two incidents occur on my 2022 bingo card.
Wow.
And not that I intend to be prescient. The thing is that when you wish things away, saying it's just never going to change for all these reasons, that's the time I become a contrarian. And when they started saying that, I go, okay, well, now's the time to start looking for opportunities. And that's why, one of the reasons why I ended up at enCore.
So do you think people really understand that domestic source of energy is incredibly important to our national security, our quality of life? To me, offshoring, and I've been doing a bunch of research on this, offshoring metals production, it all puts us all at risk within the country. Do you think people understand that yet?
They're understanding it now, more so than they did. There's this belief that if there's a McDonald's, wherever there's a McDonald's, you're going to have a market-based economy or a friendly economy, because McDonald's, McDonald's is in Beijing. It's there's was one in Moscow and St. Petersburg and everything else like that. So the belief that the almighty dollar and trade, global trade, was going to keep people on the right side. That works when you have market economies. It's the same way the British Empire kept the peace around the world, is by leveraging their mercantile economy to keep that peace and keep that flow of trade goods. And but in these days, we have situations where we believe they're good trading partners, but in reality, they're doing destructive work against us. And are leveraging government-owned companies, state-owned companies, to basically crush competition in a non-market-based fashion. But people don't want to believe that. They want to stick their heads in the sand. Oh, no, it's all market condition. I remember walking into the Heritage Foundation with a report from the Commerce Department stating that the Russians were conducting price suppression. And they told me, well, we don't believe there should be any trade action against the Russians because we believe in free markets. Price suppression, lack of, declare Russia as a non-market economy, and they still leverage on the fact that they believe in, it's all free markets. A one-way street, basically, is what it's become. And so what it's manifested into most recently is these supply chain disruptions. If you recall, a year ago, right after COVID, when the Chinese started locking down big portions of their economy, getting materials and everything else became almost impossible to get. You had to wait 12, 14 weeks to get something. It used to take 2 weeks to get, or most time prior to COVID, it was on the shelf. And that really, when you walk in the grocery store and you see empty shelves, and suddenly you realize that, wait a minute, what's going on here? It's not that manufacturing stopped, it's that we allowed all of our supply chains to come to a halt. And then there's this whole chain reaction that we're still caught up in. And as a result of it, it just shows that the whole global trade situation is still running on. It's like almost like a house of cards. And I think people are finally realizing that when they say that OPEC can cut back 100,000, what, 1 million barrels a day, or I don't remember what the number was. And guess what? Gasoline prices go up 30% overnight. I think people are realizing that what they thought were easy things to get are becoming more difficult, and are realizing that we need domestic production. It's an easy conversation to have, even with the when you got opposite, conservative liberal conversations. Everybody can come to an agreement on we need to do it here because it's the only way we can make sure it gets onto our shelves.
Yeah, and I guess now we're at the point where if we're having those conversations, and it's a bipartisan conversation, now we need the impetus to push them into action. Because you've got to permit projects, you've got to construct projects. I know enCore is in a very unique situation, owning 3 of the 10 licensed and built plants in the US for ISR, but we're at enCore, you're a part of the solution. We need more.
Yeah. And right now, and even in enCore, we've got our path forward, and we got a good, a well-established path forward, but there's only a certain window to it, right? So we got to keep adding and doing like more permitting to go beyond what we've got ahead of us. So we can continue to have a growing and growing and reliable production capacity and pipeline. And we were fortunate to have a situation where we're able to get these licensed facilities and permanent facilities. But we still have to go out and keep adding resources to feed those, because I can tell you, we built them to be hungry beasts.
Yeah,
they want production coming into them, and we got to keep those plants happy, otherwise they get grumpy.
and many adversaries that you've had in the past perhaps aren't adversaries anymore. Nuclear is clean energy. Nuclear does reduce the carbon footprint. You don't have big yellow trucks, correct?
Yeah. And so that's exactly right. So nuclear's gotten more favor. Even uranium mining, has gotten into favor. And so an interesting thing is, in the president's budget, the DOE budget, it clearly states in that, which is never done before, we need a reliable domestic supply of uranium and nuclear fuel. That has never been and stated that clearly in a document like that. It's always been kind of arm waving and everything else, and trying to get around talking about domestic uranium supply. But there's a lot of activist groups that support the administration for environmental reasons, and they have no love for uranium. But the administration is still advancing policy because they realized that we've dug a hole for ourselves by bad policy, and we got to start digging ourselves out of it. Well, climbing out of it, instead of just stop digging, and stop digging and climb out of the hole. Yeah. And the only way we can do that really, and be sure we can do it with some leverage, is to do it here. And gives leverage, whether it's mining uranium or enriching uranium or converting uranium to uranium hexafluoride. It's become very clear we need to do it here, because before, Russia provided the world's 40% of the world's demand, and now it's an unreliable supplier. So we got to fill that gap, and we can do that here in America more efficiently, in my opinion, than anywhere else.
And it must feel good, after investing your career in an industry that really was underappreciated and operating very quietly. It must feel very good to be at the forefront of what I think is a multi-decade development of a key industry. Yeah,
it feels pretty good to see the fact that, when you went, it's the perception of the industry and everything else. We've always known there's been positive aspects, but it's never really been realized until recently. And, I was in Washington, DC last week, pushing supporting some legislation that had been introduced that would not only put restrictions on imports of Russian uranium, but also provide authorization to rebuild our enrichment capacity in the U.S. and also support domestic uranium production. I came back from Washington, DC, and someone asked me how it went. I said, it feels pretty good to be loved again. Yeah, I haven't seen that for a long, long time, but we had bipartisan offices talk to us, and everybody was very supportive of what we're doing. And so I can't say everybody's on board, because there's 535 members of Congress and we had only 40 meetings. But we got a pretty good hunch as to where things are. And I could say that not only has nuclear gained significant bipartisan support, as example through the bipartisan infrastructure law, as well as the Inflation Reduction Law, regardless of how those are named with what they actually accomplished, they still had a very strong recognition of nuclear power. That translates to support for domestic uranium.
Yeah,
and
no, I think it's exciting, and I see the need for education because, like you say, there's so much people don't know after so many years. I know you spent a lot of time in Washington, working on the greater good. You're part of the Uranium Producers of America.
Yep, I'm with the uranium. I'm a past president and a board member right now, but yeah, it's believe it or not, that is an organization that's gone through big highs and lows, but it definitely punches well above its weight class and on the hill.
I bet. This has been great, Paul. I'm excited about what you're doing at enCore. I want to have another conversation after you get through the next few months, because I know you're pushing hard towards production. And I'm keen on that too. So I have one. Can I lobby for something?
Sure.
Because I'm thinking, like, since we had the conversation about Texas is where ISR your extraction of uranium really started. Can we like give them an award or something?
We'd have to think about how we would go about doing. Who would we give the award to?
I don't know. Yeah. I don't know, but I think we have to recognize their role in history.
Yeah, I do. We definitely need to. It's something that gets forgotten because, like I said, Wyoming gets all the glory and everything else because of its unique history, and New Mexico gets a lot of the glory because of its history. But Texas gets overshadowed by oil and gas. And even when you go to the legislature, 90% of the conversations about oil and gas, not about uranium. And so it does take a bit of I bet you right now there's a bill in the Texas legislature to do a research to do a study on uranium resources. I'm wondering if we can't leverage that into like a House resolution or something, or a legislative resolution recognizing the history of the uranium, the accomplishments of the Texas uranium industry and its leadership and in-situ leach or recovery. And I bet you we could do that. That would probably be something we could get a House resolution on the floor of the legislature to proclamation.
Yeah, I love it. I'm big into self-promotion. If you don't toot your own horn, who will, right? And take credit for it. And I know a lot of your team at enCore is part of that history. Mark Police, Dennis Stover, yourself, like EPA regulations.
We got not only on our technical team, but our board of directors is chock full of pioneers.
Yeah. Okay, there's our next project.
Yeah, that's right. And I think that's a project that's actually could be achieved fairly straightforwardly.
Well, that's I spoke for my supper today.
There you go.
Thanks so much, Paul. I really enjoyed this, and I hope you join us again. And best of luck at enCore as you keep pushing towards production.
Thanks a lot, Jan. It was a great conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. And thanks everybody for joining us. Again, thank you to our guest, Paul Goranson. And we'll see you next time.